Daniel had lived alone on his ranch for many years, long enough for silence to become his closest companion. He woke before sunrise every day, tied his boots without thinking, fed his horses, and checked the fences, always repeating the same routine. The work kept him busy, but his small house told a different story. Clothes lay on chairs, dust gathered on shelves, and tools were left anywhere he dropped them. He kept telling himself he would clean one day. But that day never came. By sunset, he was always too tired to think about anything except sleep. One warm afternoon, after fixing a broken fence, Daniel rode into the nearby trading post to buy supplies. The place was busy as usual, filled with cowboys trading cattle, farmers selling goods, and children running around. But Daniel's attention drifted to a quiet corner where an Apache woman stood with a small sack in her hands. Her clothes were old and patched, and her expression held tiredness that came from more than just a long day. She was speaking to storekeepers, offering to do small jobs such as washing clothes, sweeping floors, or collecting wood. But each time she asked, people shook their heads or shrugged her away. Daniel watched her carefully. He had seen her once or twice before, but never this close. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with calm eyes and long dark hair, braided to one side. There was something steady about her. She didn't beg, she didn't complain. She simply asked politely and moved on when refused. Outside the trading post, Daniel noticed two figures waiting for her. A boy who looked no older than 10, and an older woman sitting on a blanket. Both looked hungry and tired. The Apache woman returned to them empty-handed. She gave the little boy a small smile, though Daniel could tell she didn't have good news to share. Something tugged at his heart. He had seen suffering before, but this scene felt different. Maybe it was because she carried her hardship quietly, without asking for pity. Maybe it was because he saw how she placed her hand gently on the boy's head, as though she was trying to protect him from the truth. Or maybe it was simply because Daniel had been alone for too many years, and was slowly starting to notice the world around him again. With a slow breath, he stepped toward her. She looked up at him with a hint of worry, as if unsure why a stranger approached. Daniel removed his hat politely and tried to speak without startling her. "I have a small ranch not too far from here," he said gently. "It could use some cleaning. If you're looking for work, I can pay." She blinked, surprised. Most people avoided hiring Apache women, either out of prejudice or fear of judgment from others. But Daniel didn't care about those things. He cared about honesty and hard work, both of which he sensed in her eyes. "My name is Ayana," she replied softly. "If you need help, I can come." Daniel nodded. "I'm sure you will. I can pay you the usual amount for a day's work, maybe more if needed." But she immediately shook her head. "The usual amount is enough. I don't need extra." The clattered 2 mint, the 26 2 mint, and another one, the clattered 2 mint, and Hezin a muster. Her words were simple, but they carried dignity. She wasn't looking for charity. She wanted to earn an honest wage. Daniel respected that deeply. He gave her directions to his ranch and told her she could come the next morning if she agreed. She accepted with a quiet nod. As Daniel walked back to his horse, he wondered why he felt lighter. It wasn't just the idea of having a clean house. It was something about her presence, something calm and steady that stayed in his mind. That night, Daniel cleaned a little around the house, not because he wanted it spotless, but because he didn't want Ayana to think he lived like a wild animal. He stacked some tools in a corner and swept the porch. It still looked messy, but at least it was better than before. He fell asleep, thinking about how unusual it felt to expect someone's arrival. Early the next morning, Daniel heard footsteps outside. When he opened the door, he saw Ayana standing quietly with a small bundle of cloths. She had walked all the way from her shelter, on foot. Her brother was not with her, and Daniel wondered if she had left him with her mother. "You can start wherever you think is best," Daniel said, trying not to sound awkward. He suddenly felt unsure of his own home. Noticing every speck of dust and misplaced item, Ayana smiled gently. "I will do what I can." She entered the house, and Daniel stepped aside, trying to give her space. He watched for a moment as she looked around, not judging, not frowning, just observing what needed to be done. Then she rolled up her sleeves and started working with quiet focus. She swept the floors with strong, steady strokes, gathered the laundry into neat piles, washed dishes that had been sitting for weeks, and even dusted shelves Daniel didn't remember owning. She moved with a careful rhythm that showed she had done this kind of work many times before. She didn't waste a single motion. Daniel walked around outside, pretending to check things he had already checked, because he didn't want to disturb her. But he also kept thinking about her, about the tired look she had yesterday, the boy at her side, the old woman resting under the sun. Ayana didn't complain once. Every time Daniel peeked in, she was focusing on her task calmly, as if cleaning brought her some kind of peace. And sometimes, when she thought nobody was looking, she hummed softly under her breath, a gentle tune that made the house feel warmer. By midday, she finished most of the main room and had even washed the windows. Daniel tried to hand her extra money, saying she had done far more than he expected, but she refused firmly. "I agreed to the usual amount," she said. "I want to keep my word." Daniel didn't argue further. He realized she took pride in her honesty. Pressuring her would only hurt her feelings. When she finally left in the evening, Daniel walked with her a little way. The sun was lowering, painting the sky in soft red. Ayana thanked him politely and turned toward the distant path leading to her shelter. Daniel watched her walk away until she disappeared behind the trees. He returned to his home, stepped inside, and paused. The air smelled fresh. The floor was clean. The windows let in bright sunlight he had almost forgotten. But more than that, the house felt alive, as though it had been sleeping for years, and Ayana's presence had gently awakened it. Daniel sat down and let out a long breath. He had expected nothing more than a clean house, but what he received instead was something he didn't know. He missed a sense of comfort, a sense of company, a sense that maybe his quiet life didn't have to be so lonely. And though he didn't realize it yet, this simple arrangement, this small agreement between a cowboy and an Apache woman, was only the beginning of a far greater change that was about to enter both of their lives. Ayana returned to Daniel's ranch the following week, just as quietly as the first time. Daniel had been expecting her since morning, checking the road every few minutes even though he tried to act normal. He didn't understand why he felt that way. He told himself it was because he wanted his home to stay clean. But deep down, he knew it was something else, something softer, something that made his lonely ranch feel less empty. When she arrived, she greeted him with a small nod and went straight to work, just as she had promised. Daniel watched her for a moment before stepping outside so she could do her job without feeling observed. But even as he repaired small things around the barn, his mind kept drifting back to her. He remembered how she refused extra money, how she worked carefully without rushing, and how she brought a feeling of calm everywhere she went. Inside the house, Ayana continued her cleaning with quiet focus. She swept corners Daniel didn't even know existed, dusted shelves, and folded his clothes with neat, precise movements. But something was different today. She didn't just clean, she fixed things. She tightened loose nails on the chairs, repaired a small tear in one of his shirts, and arranged his tools in a corner so he could reach them easily. She even collected the broken pieces of an old lantern and placed them together, as if planning to mend it. Daniel noticed these changes when he returned inside for water. "You didn't have to do all that," he said gently. "Cleaning is enough. You don't need to fix things, too." Ayana smiled a little. "If I see something broken, I try to repair it. It is my habit." Her answer was simple, but it made Daniel feel something warm inside. Most people did the minimum they were paid for. But she went far beyond that, not for money, but because she believed in doing things properly. Later in the afternoon, Ayanna stepped into the kitchen area and paused. Daniel didn't cook very often. And when he did, it was usually just bread, beans, or something simple that kept him alive but didn't give much comfort. She opened one of his cabinets and saw only dry food. Then she checked a small basket on the shelf. There were a few old potatoes, some beans, and nothing else. Ayanna didn't say anything, but she understood why he looked tired all the time. He worked hard, but didn't take care of himself. She washed the potatoes, cleaned the pan, and started cooking a simple meal. Daniel, who had been brushing his horse outside, smelled something he hadn't smelled in a long time. A warm, home-cooked dish with seasoning. When he walked into the house, he froze for a moment. Ayanna stirred the pot quietly, steam rising toward the ceiling. "You didn't have to cook," he said, surprised. "I saw you don't eat properly," she answered gently. "This is simple food." Daniel had no words for a second. He wasn't used to someone caring about his well-being. But Ayanna didn't act like she was doing something special. She simply finished cooking and served him a plate with calm hands. It was the best meal he had tasted in months. After he finished eating, Daniel tried again to offer her extra pay. "You did more than cleaning today," he said. "I want you to take this." "Not." Ayanna shook her head quickly. "No, I agreed to one payment. If I take more, it will feel wrong." Daniel admired her honesty. But it also made him worry. She clearly needed money. He had seen her family and the condition they lived in. Yet she refused anything more than what she earned. He wanted to argue, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable either. So he simply nodded and accepted her decision for now. As the day went on, they started talking more naturally. At first, their conversations were small and light. Ayanna told him about plants she used to gather with her mother, and Daniel shared stories from his childhood. Like the time he tried to ride a wild horse and fell face first into a water trough. Ayanna laughed softly at that. And Daniel realized he had never heard her laugh before. It was gentle and warm, and for a moment, he forgot how lonely his ranch used to be. He found himself sharing things he didn't usually tell others: his father's old ranch lessons, his habit of talking to his horses when nobody else was around, and how he sometimes felt like a stranger passing through his own life. Ayanna listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. She had a way of listening that made Daniel feel understood. Later, she told him small pieces about her family. Her mother had fallen sick many months ago, and Ayanna took care of her every day. Her younger brother, Kime, tried to help, but he was still too young to understand the weight of their struggles. They had no stable home, no steady income, only what Ayanna earned from small jobs here and there. Daniel listened carefully. The more he learned, the more he admired her strength. She carried burdens most people would not survive. Yet she worked hard with a calm heart and never complained. Her silence was not weakness, it was discipline. Her kindness was not softness, it was strength. As the sun began to lower, Ayanna finished her work for the day. The room looked brighter, the air fresher, and even the old furniture seemed more welcoming. Daniel walked with her to the edge of the property, where the dirt path led back toward her family's shelter. He wanted to escort her all the way home, but he also knew she might not accept such help. Before she left, she turned to him and said, "Your home is beautiful now. It feels warm. You should keep it like this." Daniel smiled, though he knew he probably wouldn't keep it as neat when she wasn't there. "I'll try," he said, and he meant it. She nodded once, then walked away, her shadow stretching behind her as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Daniel stayed there for a long moment, watching her figure become smaller and smaller until she disappeared. When he walked back into the house, he felt something unusual, something soft and peaceful inside his chest. His home wasn't just clean. It felt lived in, cared for. The silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. He realized he looked forward to her visits now, not because she cleaned his house, but because she brought life back into it. She brought a gentle kindness he hadn't known he missed. Ayanna had come into his life quietly, like a warm breeze after a long winter. Daniel didn't know where this path would lead, or how much deeper their connection would grow. But he did know one thing. This was no longer just a simple working arrangement. Something meaningful was forming. Something he hadn't expected. And for the first time in many years, Daniel felt that maybe his story wasn't finished. Maybe. Just maybe. It was finally beginning. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Ayanna and her quiet strength. Every week, she came to his ranch exactly on time, did her work without delay, and left before sunset. But Daniel started noticing small things: how tired her eyes looked some days, how she held her hands when they were cold from long walking, and how her smile, gentle as it was, always carried a little sadness behind it. One evening, after she finished work, Daniel watched her walk down the long road toward the valley where her shelter was. The sun was sinking slowly, and the sky glowed gold and pink. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then decided he couldn't ignore the uneasiness growing inside him. He saddled his horse and rode quietly behind her at a distance, not wanting to frighten her or make her feel followed. Ayanna walked steadily with her small bundle of cleaning cloths in her hands. But Daniel noticed she limped slightly, as if her feet hurt. She didn't stop to rest, even though the road was rough. As she moved farther from the ranch, the land grew emptier, just dry soil, scattered rocks, and tall grass swaying with the wind. The sun dipped lower, and darkness began to settle. Ayanna walked with determination, but Daniel knew traveling this path alone in the dark was dangerous. Snakes moved when the ground cooled. Coyotes searched for food. Even a misstep on a loose rock could cause trouble. After a few minutes of thinking, Daniel nudged his horse forward and approached her gently so she wouldn't be startled. "Ayanna," he called softly. She turned around quickly, her expression surprised and a little confused. "Daniel? Why are you here? Is something wrong?" He shook his head. "No, nothing's wrong. I didn't like the idea of you walking alone in the dark. Let me take you home." Ayanna hesitated, shifting slightly from one foot to the other. "I can walk. You don't need to." "I know," Daniel said kindly. "You don't need anyone. But it would make me feel better. The road isn't safe after sunset." Ayanna lowered her eyes for a moment, thinking. She didn't want to be a burden, but she could see he wasn't offering out of pity. He offered out of genuine concern. After a quiet breath, she nodded. Daniel reached down and helped her onto the horse. She sat behind him, holding onto the saddle lightly, not wanting to disturb him. Daniel kept the horse at a steady pace, careful on the uneven path. As they rode, Ayanna's silence felt different, not distant, but thoughtful. Daniel didn't want to question her, but he also didn't want her to feel she had to hide everything from him. After a few minutes, she said softly, "You didn't have to come all this way." Daniel smiled a little. "Maybe not. But I wanted to. I don't like seeing you walk home alone at night." Ayanna didn't answer immediately. She looked at the horizon, where a few stars were beginning to appear. "Most people don't worry about me," she whispered. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. "I'm not most people." She looked down at her hands, and Daniel saw her fingers had small scrapes and redness, signs of hard work, cold nights, and long walks. He felt a tug inside his heart, something protective and warm. After a while, they reached the valley. Instead of houses or cabins, Daniel saw a small, broken structure made of old wood and cloth. Ayanna's family shelter barely stood upright. The walls leaned in different directions, and the roof sagged dangerously. Outside, her little brother sat on the ground, watching the stars with wide eyes. Her mother lay under a thin blanket, too weak to sit up. Daniel's heart tightened at the sight. Ayanna stepped off the horse quickly. "Thank you for bringing me," she said softly, trying to stand between Daniel and the shelter, as if embarrassed for him to see their condition. But Daniel stepped closer, his eyes worried. "How long have you all been living like this?" Ayanna didn't answer at first. She knelt beside her brother, checked his hands, touched her mother's forehead gently, and made sure they were warm. Only after that did she look at Daniel. "Since last winter," she said in a quiet voice, "we had to move from our old place. My mother became sick, and we had nowhere else to go." Daniel stepped closer, his voice softer. "And you're doing all of this alone?" Ayanna gave a small nod. "I take small jobs wherever I can. Some days we have food, some days we don't. But I try. I must take care of them." Her little brother reached out and held her hand. Ayanna squeezed his fingers gently and gave him a warm smile that hid all her struggle behind it. Daniel felt something heavy settle in his chest, anger at the unfairness, sadness for her hardships, and deep admiration for her strength. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for help. She carried everything on her own shoulders, with quiet courage. He noticed the shelter walls shaking slightly in the breeze. One strong wind could break them. The ground where her mother lay was cold. There were no proper blankets, no food pot, no warm fire. Daniel didn't show his shock. He didn't want to hurt her pride. Instead, he said softly, "Ayanna, you should have told me." Ayanna looked at him with calm eyes. "And what would that change? Everyone has problems. I don't want to bring mine to others. You gave me work. That is enough." Daniel felt something deep. Something like a quiet promise forming inside him. This wasn't enough. Not for him. Not after seeing this. But he didn't argue with her. He simply nodded, even though his mind was already thinking of ways to help without embarrassing her. After a few moments, he quietly stepped back. "I'll go now, so you can rest," he said. Ayanna walked with him a few steps. "Thank you again for bringing me home," she said softly. "You never have to thank me for that," Daniel replied. "Just be safe." He gently nudged his horse and rode off. But only after he was far enough did Ayanna let out a small breath. She watched him until he disappeared behind the hill. But Daniel didn't go home. Instead, he stopped at a distance where she couldn't see him and waited until she and her family went to sleep. When the night grew darker and the valley fell silent, Daniel quietly returned with a small bundle he had prepared earlier, though he hadn't planned to use it this soon. He left warm blankets near the shelter. Then he left a bag of food, bread, beans, potatoes, dried fruit carefully placed where she would see it in the morning. He added medicine he had bought for his ranch but never used. He didn't leave a note. He didn't want her to feel shame or obligation. He simply stood there for a moment in the moonlight, looking at the fragile shelter and the brave woman inside it. Then he turned and rode home, carrying a mixture of worry and determination inside his heart. He knew one thing clearly now. Ayanna needed more help than she let on. And he silently promised himself that he would not let her carry everything alone anymore. The week after the storm arrived without warning, the sky turned dark early in the afternoon, and heavy winds rushed across the land like wild spirits. Daniel had been working in the barn when the first drops of rain fell, loud and cold. He looked at the sky and felt worry twist inside him. Ayanna always came on the same day, always before noon, always walking alone from the valley. She never missed a day. Not once. But today, the path in front of his ranch remained empty. Daniel tried to convince himself that maybe she chose to stay home because of the storm. But as the wind grew stronger, his worry grew heavier. He stepped outside several times to look down the road. Rain soaked his hat and clothes, but he didn't care. He kept waiting, hoping he would see her small figure appear through the dark clouds. When the sun disappeared behind the thick storm clouds, and her place in his yard stayed empty, Daniel knew something was wrong. Ayanna would never miss work unless she had no choice. He tightened his coat, prepared his horse, and rode into the storm without hesitating. The wind blew so hard that his horse struggled to walk straight. Rain poured down like someone was throwing buckets of water from the sky. Lightning cracked across the clouds, bright and sharp. Daniel felt fear rising in his chest, not for himself, but for Ayanna, for her mother, for her brother. Their shelter had already been weak, even in good weather. A storm like this could tear it apart. Daniel rode faster, pushing his horse carefully but firmly. Mud splashed under the hooves, and water hit his face with every gust of wind. He followed the path toward the valley, the same one Ayanna walked every week, each step making his heart beat harder. When he reached the valley, he saw at once that his fears had been correct. The shelter where Ayanna lived with her family had collapsed. The roof had fallen inward, and one of the wooden walls had broken completely. The ground around it was soaked, and the small blanket that used to hang near the entrance was blown far away by the wind. Daniel's heart froze. He jumped off his horse, ran toward the broken shelter, and shouted, "Ayanna! Ayanna! Are you there?" For a moment, there was only the sound of the storm. Then he heard a faint cry from inside the fallen structure. Daniel rushed forward, pushing away broken wood, lifting heavy boards as rain hit his face. Under the collapsed roof, he found Ayanna trying desperately to shield her mother and younger brother with her own body. Water poured around them, and the cold wind blew directly into the small space they had tried to make safe. When Ayanna looked up and saw Daniel, her eyes widened with shock. Rain dripped from her hair, but she didn't move from her place. "Daniel?" she whispered, her voice almost lost in the storm. "Why are you here?" Daniel didn't answer her question. Instead, he knelt down beside her and began lifting the heavier pieces of wood. "We need to get you out of here. All of you." Ayanna tried to protest. "You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous. I can handle." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You're not alone. Not anymore." She looked at him, stunned by the gentleness and certainty in his voice. Together, they lifted her mother, who was weak and shivering. Daniel wrapped his own coat around her. Ayanna held her brother close, trying to block the wind from hitting his small body. Daniel guided them toward his horse, helping them step through the muddy ground. The horse shifted nervously, scared of the thunder, but Daniel calmed him with steady words. He helped Ayanna's mother onto the saddle, then lifted her brother to sit in front of her. Ayanna looked soaked, exhausted, and worried beyond measure, but Daniel gently held her arm. "You ride with them," he said. She shook her head. "No, I can walk." "Ayanna," Daniel said, meeting her eyes. "Please, let me do this." For the first time since he met her, she didn't argue. She climbed onto the horse behind her brother, holding him tightly. Her mother leaned weakly against her shoulder. Daniel grabbed the horse's reins and led them through the storm. The wind howled, and rain hit their faces like small stones. But Daniel kept going. He walked ahead of the horse, guiding its steps, keeping it steady on the slippery ground. Every few minutes he looked up to make sure Ayanna and her family were holding on. Ayanna watched him through teary eyes, not because of the cold or the storm, but because for the first time in a long time, someone was fighting for her. Not just offering work, not just giving her a coin, but fighting for her life, for her family's life, without asking anything in return. By the time they reached Daniel's ranch, all 4 of them were soaked from head to toe. Daniel brought them inside quickly, warming the room by lighting a fire in the stove. He fetched blankets, dry clothes, warm water, and anything else he could find. Ayanna stayed close to her mother and brother, but her hands shook from cold and fear. Daniel knelt beside her. "They're safe now," he said softly. "You're safe." Ayanna looked at him with eyes full of emotion, relief, exhaustion, gratitude, so deep it showed in every trembling breath she took. "You," she whispered. "You saved us." Daniel shook his head. "No. I just did what anyone should do. Thanks for watching. A might example." Ayanna lowered her eyes. "No. Not everyone does this. Not many care." Daniel felt something inside him soften, something he didn't know he had been holding back. He gently placed a warm blanket around her shoulders, making sure she was covered. Ayanna looked at the blanket and then up at Daniel again. And then, for the first time since he met her voice broke not from weakness, but from emotion she had held inside for too long. "You were the one who left food and blankets at our shelter," she said softly. Daniel froze for a moment, surprised she figured it out. He didn't speak. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do all that for us?" Daniel felt his throat tighten slightly as he answered. "Because you deserve help. Because you work hard. Because no one should carry everything alone. And because—" he hesitated, his voice gentle and steady. "Because I care." Ayanna looked at him for a long moment as the fire crackled softly in the background. She didn't step back. She didn't hide her face. She simply let his words settle inside her heart. Outside, the storm continued without mercy. But inside Daniel's home, something warm and quiet began to grow. Something stronger than fear. Stronger than loneliness. Something that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. It was the beginning of a bond formed not by chance, but by kindness, courage, and the gentle understanding between two lives that had been lonely for far too long. The storm passed by morning, leaving the land wet and quiet. The air smelled fresh, and the sky was finally clear. But inside Daniel's ranch house, warmth filled every corner. Ayanna's mother rested on a soft bed with blankets wrapped around her. Her younger brother, Keme, slept peacefully near the fire, his small face relaxed for the first time in many days. And Ayanna sat beside them, watching over them with gentle eyes. Daniel had barely slept, but he didn't feel tired. He kept checking the fire, making sure it burned steadily. He brought warm soup to Ayanna's mother, and fresh water for Keme. Every time Ayanna thanked him, he simply nodded, as if caring for them was the most natural thing in the world. By midday, Ayanna's mother finally opened her eyes properly. She looked weak, but calmer, and she whispered something in her native language. Ayanna leaned down and listened, then turned toward Daniel. She says, "Thank you." Ayanna translated softly. "She says you brought light into a dark time." Daniel smiled gently. "She doesn't need to thank me. I'm glad she's safe." Ayanna looked at him in a way she had never looked before, like she was seeing a different side of him. A deeper side. A side that had been hidden behind his quiet ranch life. As the sun rose higher, Ayanna helped her mother eat a little. Daniel gave Kimi a warm mug of milk, and the boy's face lit up with a smile so innocent and bright that Daniel couldn't help but smile back. The house, once silent and empty, now felt full of life, movement, and soft voices. It felt like a home, not just a place where one man lived alone. When afternoon came, Daniel brought out fresh clothes he found in an old trunk. They were simple, but clean and warm. He placed them near Ayanna. "These might fit you and your family," he said. "It's not much, but they're better than soaked clothes." Ayanna touched the fabric gently. "Daniel, you've already done too much." "No," he replied calmly. "Not for you." Her breath caught slightly when he said that. She looked down, her fingers tightening on the cloth for a moment. Then, she gave him a soft smile. Small, but meaningful. Later, Daniel cooked a proper meal for all of them. Simple vegetables, warm bread, a little meat. Ayana offered to help, but he insisted she rest with her mother. When he served the food, everyone ate slowly, savoring the warmth and comfort. Keme even laughed a little, something Ayana hadn't heard in a long time. After they finished eating, Ayana stepped outside to breathe in the fresh air. Daniel followed her quietly and stood beside her on the porch. The land looked peaceful after the storm, with sunlight reflecting off wet grass and puddles shining like mirrors. Ayana wrapped her shawl around herself and looked at the open fields. "Your ranch is very beautiful," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "It's quiet, sometimes too quiet." Ayana's eyes lowered slightly. "Not anymore." Her simple words touched Daniel more deeply than she realized. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They stood side by side, listening to the gentle rustling of the wind. Then Ayana turned toward him. "I never thought." Daniel looked at her with patient eyes. "You can tell me." She took a slow breath. "I never thought anyone would help us the way you did. People see us, but they don't really see us. They think we don't deserve kindness. But you—" Her voice trembled softly, not from fear, but from emotion. "You treated us like human beings, like we mattered." Daniel gently rested his hand on the porch railing, close to hers but not touching. "You've always mattered, Ayana. You and your family." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the truth of his words settle deeply in her heart. Daniel continued, his voice quiet but steady. "You work hard. You care for your family with everything you have. You're strong, Ayana." Her eyes softened, and she looked at him with grateful warmth. "And you're kind, Daniel. Kinder than you know." As the sun started to lower, casting warm golden light across the land, Daniel knew he had to say something important. Something that had been growing inside him for days. "You don't have to go back to that broken shelter," he said. "Stay here. At least until your mother is strong again. There's enough space. You'll all be safe." Ayana's eyes widened. Her first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want to burden him. But she also knew her mother could not survive in the open valley anymore. The storm had destroyed everything they had left. Still, she asked quietly, "Are you sure? We don't want to cause trouble." Daniel stepped closer, speaking softly but firmly. "You won't cause trouble. You'd be helping me, actually." Ayana looked confused. "Helping you?" Daniel nodded with a small smile. "The house feels different with you all here, warmer. And I don't want this home to be empty again." Ayana felt her heart beat a little faster. She wasn't used to hearing such honest emotion. She wasn't used to being wanted, not as a worker, but as a person. "We can stay," she whispered, "but only if we work. We don't want charity." Daniel laughed softly. "You work too much already. Just stay. Rest. Heal. That's enough." Ayana nodded slowly, accepting his offer with a gentle bow of her head. Over the next days, life settled into a new rhythm. Ayana helped with small tasks, cooked meals, cared for her mother, and played with Keme outside. Daniel repaired the fence with Keme's excited help. Ayana's mother grew stronger each day, smiling more often, her eyes brighter whenever Daniel brought her food or checked on her. The house, once silent and lonely, felt alive. There was laughter, quiet conversations, footsteps moving back and forth. Warm meals shared at the table, not as employer and worker, but as people connected by kindness and trust. Daniel found himself waking each morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. And every time he saw Ayana's gentle smile or heard her soft humming as she worked, he felt something shift inside him. Something warm, something hopeful. One evening, as the sky turned pink and orange, Ayana stood outside feeding the chickens. Daniel joined her, leaning against the fence. She looked at him and smiled. "We came here because you helped us," she said softly. "But now, It feels like home. Daniel felt his heart lift. It feels like home to me, too. Their eyes met, and in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them. Something gentle, powerful, and unhurried. It wasn't sudden love or rushed promises. It was understanding, respect, a bond built slowly, carefully, through kindness and care. Ayana looked at the horizon, her voice warm. I came here to clean your house, but I found much more than work. Daniel smiled softly. And I hired someone to clean, but I received much more too. They stood together as the sun disappeared, feeling a peace neither had known in a long time. The cowboy who lived alone and the Apache woman who carried her whole world on her shoulders had found something unexpected. Something that couldn't be bought or asked for. They found a place where burdens became lighter. They found a home. They found each other.